Hello and welcome. Today we will talk about Chapter 5, Ethical Decision Making. So as we talk about Chapter 5, Ethical Decision Making, you're going to see a very, very good framework for ethical decision making in any business environment or any workplace. The model that's provided to you, entitled the Model of Ethical Decision-Making Process in Business, it includes ethical issues, intensity, individual factors, and organizational factors such as the corporate culture and having an opportunity to do something that tempts us sometimes. So all of these are somewhat interrelated factors which influence the evaluation and intentions behind the decisions that produce ethical or unethical behavior at any given time or day or week or month in a given workplace, especially in corporate arena where profits are always measured on an ongoing basis. In terms of ethical issue intensity, the first step in ethical decision making is to recognize that an ethical issue requires an individual or even work to choose among many actions that various stakeholders inside as well as outside the organization will ultimately evaluate as either wrong or right. So which is it going to be? Ethical awareness is the ability to perceive whether a situation or decision has an ethical dimension to it. Ethical issue intensity is usually defined as the relevance or importance of some specific event or decision in the eyes of the individual, the work group, or even in the organization's eyes. How would all of the people in that organization look at the importance of or relevancy of a specific decision that needs to be made? The intensity of an ethical issue relates to its perceived importance to the decision maker. Individuals are subject to at least 6 spheres of influence when they're confronted with ethical choices. For example, the workplace itself, our family, religion, legal system, community, and our profession seems to have code of conduct or certain norms. And the level of importance of each of these influences tends to vary depending on how important the decision maker perceives the issue to be. The perception of ethical issue intensity can be influenced by the manager's use of rewards and punishment, by the corporate policies and corporate values to sensitize employees. For some employees, business ethical issues may not necessarily reach critical awareness if managers fail to identify and educate them about the specific problem areas in their departments or in their organizations. Moral intensity relates to an individual's perception of social pressure and the harm that decision will have on others, either in the department, in the family, in the community, in the organization, or in general society. Individual factors relates to the fact that people often base their decisions regarding ethical issues on their own values and morals of what is right and what they consider to be wrong. These values are very subjective and can vary across cultures, and across departments, across organizations, and obviously across continents. Individuals generally learn these values through socialization process, especially during their early years in life, when they're interacting with family members, with social groups based on religious values and teachings and inculcations, and in their formal education in school system. Some things are taught in schools. Some people are seen as heroes by the specific culture, where other cultures may not necessarily see them that way in their education systems. So nonetheless, these are very important influences on young children during their socialization years. Although a person's situation to engage in ethical behavior relates to the individual values, organizational and social forces also play a huge role. For example, while a person may intend to report a specific misconduct to a coworker, social or financial pressures might convince him or her not to do so. In other words, if you do report a problem, will you get fired? Will you lose a promotion? Will you lose an opportunity to lead a team or a project in the future, especially if your bosses or influential teammates or colleagues do not necessarily agree with you or your values. There's also some research regarding how men and women see ethical issues and how they perceive ethical concerns. Research regarding gender on ethical decision-making shows that in many aspects there are no differences between men and women. But when differences are found, we see that women are generally more ethical than males. The question is, why would that be? My research shows that men and women up until about the ages of 20 to 30 seem to show a huge difference in terms of ethical decision making, and women seem to be at a higher level of maturity at a younger age compared to men. However, as men and women get older, get more education and get more experience, it seems like the difference is less statistically significant between men and women. So this probably tells us that women tend to use a different process with regards to their ethical decision making. Perhaps they're considering the impact of their decisions on others, whereas men, we tend to approach ethical decision making in terms of it is bottom line profits perhaps, and we ignore the impact on others. However, as we get older, we learn that it is not a good idea to increase our profits when it hurts the community, when it hurts other individuals or groups or cultures. So therefore, with age and experience in education and learning between men and women, there seems to be equality of ethical maturity between men and women. Research also shows that education perhaps makes a difference. As literature and empirical studies emphasize, education and work experience are both positively correlated with making ethical decisions. It is thought that those who are more familiarized with ethical decision-making process due to education or experience in the workplace or in society, they're more likely to spend more time examining and selecting different alternatives to a specific issue that they have to make a decision on at a given time. Research also has done a lot of empirical studies on nationality. Nationality is the legal relationship between a person in the country in which he or she is born. There are cultural differences which may contribute to differing value systems. In other words, national cultures socialize us to either go one way or another way compared to other cultures. So it doesn't mean that one culture is right and the other one is wrong necessarily, but we need to know that cultures do drive and influence our behaviors to a greater extent compared to organizational cultures. Research on age and ethical decision-making reveals a very complicated relationship between these variables. We see that younger managers are far more influenced by organizational culture than older managers or older workers in any given workplace. There's also the locus of control, which relates to individual differences in relation to a generalized belief about how one is affected by internal versus external events or reinforcements in our departments, organizations, and society. So those of you who believe in external control, in other words, external variables tend to influence us, see themselves as going with the flow because that is all they can do. since they believe that, the external forces are in control, therefore we have little choice in influencing what needs to be done. On the other hand, those who believe in internal control or internals believe that they control the events in their lives by their own efforts as well as by their skill in trust in their capacity to influence the environment. So are you an internal or are you an external? Depending on which orientation you have, external or internal, again, your beliefs will be impacted to some extent. While we still cannot be certain how significant locus of control is in terms of ethical decision making, one study has found that internals were positively correlated to ethical decision making, while externals were negatively correlated. Well, of course, it is very difficult to be certain to see the impact and significance of locus of control on ethical decision making of individuals. There has been some studies that found that internals were more positively correlated to ethical decision making, while externals were negatively correlated. There are also organizational factors. In this case, we know that no one really operates in a vacuum. In the workplace, organizations' values have the greatest influence on our decisions. The alignment between a person's own personal values and the values of the organization tends to help to create a positive work attitude and organizational outcomes. So it's good to find a company that matches your values internally. That's why we say there has to be a fit between the person and the organization that he or she chooses to work with. And the best way to tell whether there's a fit or not initially is to look at the decisions that a company has made. What values did they emphasize the most? And to understand their corporate culture. A corporate culture can be defined as a set of values, norms, and artifacts which include the different ways that the organization solves problems, that their employees of an organization seem to share these norms, artifacts in the way that they solve problems. Do they focus on their impact on the communities that they operate in, or do they focus more on the shareholders and the bottom line profits alone? So that tells you a little bit about the organizational culture and how employees are influenced to behave and decide. The ethical culture is a function of many factors, including corporate policies on ethics, the top management's leadership on ethical issues, the influence of coworkers, as well as the opportunity for unethical behavior at any given time. The more ethical a culture is perceived to be, the less likely employees are to make an ethical decision. Those who have influence in a work group, including their peers, their managers, their coworkers, and their subordinates, are referred to as significant others. Obedience to authority tends to help to explain why some employees resolve business ethics issues by simply following the directives of their superior. In organizations that emphasize respect for superiors, employees sometimes do feel that they're expected to carry out all of their superiors' orders at any given time. So in a way, it is mandatory to do what your boss tells you, regardless of whether you agree or disagree with that decision. In regards to the opportunity variable, opportunity describes the conditions in an organization which can limit or permit ethical or unethical behavior. Opportunity results from conditions that either provides rewards or fails to erect barriers against unethical behavior in a given department or organizational culture. Opportunity also relates to individuals' immediate job context. where they work, for example, with whom they actually work, in the nature of the work itself. The opportunity that employees have for unethical behavior in an organization can be greatly reduced through formal codes of conduct, through policies, and relevant rules that are adequately enforced by management and by the peers and by the human resources department of any organization. So these mechanisms for eliminating misconduct should be consistent from day to day, from employee to employee, as well as aggressive. Because if you wait to basically tell one of your employees that he or she made a bad decision 2 months ago, that means others get the perception that that conduct was okay for at least during the past 2 months. So it might negatively influence the culture. So if you see misconduct or wrongdoing, you need to correct it immediately and obviously communicate the right behaviors and standards to all employees within the department. We should also talk about the business ethics intention behavior in overall evaluation. A person's intentions in the final decision regarding what action he or she will actually take are the last steps in ethical decision-making process. Sometimes having guilty feelings or being uneasy about something is usually your first sign that an unethical decision may have occurred. This feeling of guilt or uneasiness or even not being able to sleep at night does happen when a person's behaviors are inconsistent with ethical judgment. In other words, there's incongruency between what a person believes he or she should have done and what he or she actually does or decides to do. In psychology and organizational behavior, it's also referred to as cognitive dissonance. So when you do have this cognitive dissonance, there is going to be this guilt or uneasiness which prevents people to basically go on with a good living. In other words, you cannot sometimes sleep at night simply because you're not sure whether you made the right decision or whether you made the wrong decision. So it is good to look at our decisions, reflect upon it before actually implementing it. The road to success, keep in mind, depends upon how the person defines success.